The chandeliers at the Newman Ranch glittered like a constellation brought down to earth, every crystal catching the soft golden light as if it had been polished just for this moment. Nikki Newman's birthday, a night meant to celebrate legacy, power, and the illusion of perfection. The air buzzed with laughter, champagne flutes clinking, and whispered conversations that always seemed to hover just beneath the surface in Genoa City. Nikki stood at the center of it all, radiant and composed, her smile carefully practiced over decades of triumphs and heartbreaks. Tonight, she intended to hold on to that joy, to keep the evening untouched by the chaos that so often followed her family. Victor Newman, ever the commanding presence, stood close by her side, his hand resting lightly on her back as though silently claiming both her and the empire they had built together. Guests admired them, envied them, and feared them in equal measure. Jack Abbott lingered near the bar, exchanging polite conversation, but watching Victor with the familiar tension of a rivalry that refused to die. Ashley Abbott and Phyllis Summers were engaged in their own subtle power dance, while Billy Abbott seemed distracted, his gaze drifting more than once toward the entrance, as if anticipating something or someone. That someone arrived with impeccable timing. Diane Jenkins stepped into the room like a storm disguised as elegance, her presence instantly shifting the energy. Conversations faltered. Eyes turned. Even the music seemed to dip for a beat. Diane wore a calm, almost serene expression, but there was a glint in her eyes that suggested calculation, purpose, something far more dangerous than mere social ambition. Nikki's smile tightened almost imperceptibly as she spotted her, the warmth in her expression cooling just a degree. Victor noticed too, his posture stiffening, jaw tightening in that subtle way that only those closest to him recognized as a warning sign. Diane approached slowly, deliberately, greeting a few guests along the way as though she were simply another attendee enjoying the festivities. But there was nothing casual about her presence. "Diane," Nikki said when she finally reached them, her voice smooth but edged with steel. "I didn't realize you'd be attending." Diane's smile widened just enough to be unsettling. "Oh, Nikki, I wouldn't miss it for the world. A celebration like this? It's historic." Victor's eyes narrowed. "Say what you came to say, Diane." There it was, the acknowledgement that this wasn't just a social call. A hush began to ripple outward, subtle at first, as people sensed the shift. Conversations dulled into murmurs, attention quietly redirecting toward the trio at the center of the room. Nikki felt it, the way the night was slipping from her grasp, the way something ugly was about to surface. She placed her champagne flute down carefully, as if grounding herself. "I actually came to give you a gift," Diane said lightly. Nikki's brow furrowed. "I don't want anything from you." "Oh, I think you'll want this," Diane replied, her tone turning sharper, more deliberate. "Because it's the truth." Victor stepped forward slightly, positioning himself between Diane and Nikki. Enough games. But Diane didn't back down. If anything, she seemed to draw strength from the tension. "You've spent years building this image, Victor. The perfect patriarch. The devoted husband. The man who controls everything." She paused, letting her gaze sweep across the room, ensuring she had an audience. "But even you couldn't control this." Nikki's heart began to pound. "Control what?" Diane turned her eyes back to Nikki, and for a moment, there was something almost sympathetic there, but it vanished just as quickly. "Your husband's past." Victor's voice dropped, low and dangerous. "Diane." But she pressed on. "Years ago, Victor made a choice. A secret choice. One that didn't just disappear, no matter how much money or power he threw at it." She took a breath, as if savoring the moment. "Victor has another child." The words seemed to echo, reverberating through the room like a shockwave. For a second, no one moved. No one spoke. It was as if time itself had frozen. Nikki blinked, her expression shifting from confusion to disbelief. That's not possible." Victor didn't respond immediately, and that silence was louder than any denial could have been. "Tell her," Diane urged softly, almost cruelly. "Tell Nikki the truth." All eyes were on Victor now. The great Victor Newman, the man who always had control, who always had an answer. But for the first time, there was hesitation. a flicker of something uncertain in his gaze. Victor. Nikki's voice cracked slightly, the composure she had worked so hard to maintain beginning to fracture. Tell me she's lying. Victor looked at her, really looked at her, and in that moment, Nikki knew. Even before he spoke, she knew. It was a long time ago, he said finally, his voice measured, but lacking its usual authority. Before everything we have now. Nikki staggered back a step, as if physically struck. No. It didn't mean anything, Victor continued, trying to regain control of the narrative. It was a mistake. A mistake, Nikki repeated, her voice rising. A mistake that resulted in a child? The room was utterly silent now, every guest transfixed. Jack watched intently, his expression unreadable, while Phyllis's eyes gleamed with barely concealed intrigue. Billy shook his head slightly, as if even he couldn't believe what he was witnessing. Why didn't you tell me? Nikki demanded. Victor's jaw tightened. Because it was handled. Diane let out a soft, incredulous laugh. Handled. That's one way to put it. Nikki turned sharply to her. What do you know about this? Enough, Diane replied. Enough to know that this child, this person, is very much alive. And not nearly as far removed from your lives as Victor would like you to believe. The implication hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Nikki's gaze snapped back to Victor. Where is this child? Victor hesitated again, and that hesitation spoke volumes. Victor! Nikki shouted, the last remnants of her composure shattering. Where is your child? He exhaled slowly, as though weighing his options, calculating the fallout even now. In Genoa City. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Nikki's face went pale. Here? All this time? Diane nodded, her voice almost gentle now, though the damage had already been done. Closer than you think. Who? Nikki whispered. Victor didn't answer immediately, and Diane didn't rush to fill the silence this time. She had already detonated the bomb, now she was content to let the explosion unfold. Who is it? Nikki pressed, her voice trembling. Victor finally spoke, each word heavy. Someone you know. That was the final blow. Nikki's knees nearly gave out, and she had to steady herself against the table. The party, her party, had become something unrecognizable, a stage for betrayal, for secrets, for the unraveling of everything she thought she knew. Around them, the guests began to murmur again, the shock giving way to speculation, to whispers that would spread through Genoa City like wildfire. Diane stepped back slightly, her expression one of quiet satisfaction. She had accomplished exactly what she came to do. Happy birthday, Nikki, she said softly. Nikki didn't respond. She couldn't. Her world had shifted too violently, too suddenly. Victor reached for her, but she pulled away. Don't, she said, her voice hollow. Don't touch me. For the first time in a long time, Victor Newman looked like a man who had lost control. And as the night continued to unravel, one thing was certain, nothing in Genoa City would ever be the same again. Nikki's breath came in shallow, uneven pulls as the weight of Victor's confession settled over her like a crushing storm. The room, once filled with laughter, music, and celebration, now felt suffocating, every pair of eyes pressing in on her, waiting, watching. She had spent years mastering composure, surviving scandals, betrayals, and heartbreaks that would have broken anyone else. But this was different. This wasn't just another secret. This was a fracture in the very foundation of her life. Everyone, please, Nikki finally managed, her voice trembling, but loud enough to cut through the murmurs. This is a private matter. But no one moved. Of course they didn't. In Genoa City, nothing involving the Newmans was ever truly private, especially not something this explosive. Victor straightened, his instinct for control kicking back in, even if it was only a shadow of its usual force. You heard my wife. The party is over. That did it. Slowly, reluctantly, guests began to disperse. Some offered awkward glances, others whispered behind raised hands, and a few, like Phyllis, lingered just long enough to absorb every last drop of drama before finally stepping away. Jack hesitated near the doorway, his gaze lingering on Nikki, a flicker of genuine concern breaking through his otherwise composed exterior. But even he knew this wasn't a moment he could step into. Within minutes, the grand room emptied, leaving behind only a handful of people who were too deeply entangled in the fallout to leave. Victor, Nikki, Diane, and, lingering near the edge like a ghost caught between curiosity and dread, Billy. The silence that followed was deafening. Nikki turned slowly, her eyes locking onto Victor with a mixture of devastation and fury. "Start talking," she said, her voice low but lethal. "No more half-truths. No more control. I want everything." Victor's instinct was to deflect, to manage, to reshape the narrative into something he could contain. But one look at Nikki told him that wouldn't work, not this time. He exhaled slowly, the weight of years pressing against him. "It happened decades ago," he began. "Before some of the most defining moments of my life. I was in a different place." Nikki laughed bitterly. "That's your explanation? You were in a different place, so you created a whole human being you conveniently forgot to mention." "I didn't forget," Victor said sharply. "I made a decision. One I believed was best for everyone involved." Diane folded her arms, watching with keen interest. "Best for everyone, or best for you?" Victor shot her a warning look, but it lacked its usual bite. Nikki stepped closer, her voice rising. "Who is the mother?" Victor hesitated, and that hesitation only fueled Nikki's anger. "Say it," she demanded. "It was a brief relationship," he said carefully. "Someone who wasn't meant to be part of my long-term life." "That's not what I asked," Nikki snapped. "Who is she?" Victor's silence stretched just a moment too long. Diane smirked faintly. "See, this is where it gets even more interesting." Victor cut her off. "Enough, Diane." But Nikki turned on her. "No, let her talk. She seems to be the only one interested in telling the truth tonight." Diane tilted her head slightly, almost sympathetically. "The mother isn't the real shock, Nikki. The real shock is the child." Nikki's heart pounded. "Why? What does that mean?" Diane's eyes flicked toward Victor, then back to Nikki. "Because this isn't someone hidden away in another country. This isn't some distant secret you'll never have to face." "Stop speaking in riddles," Nikki shouted. Billy shifted uncomfortably. "Maybe we should." "No," Nikki cut him off without looking. "No one leaves. Not until I know everything." Victor stepped forward, his voice firm despite the cracks forming beneath it. "The child grew up without knowing me. That was intentional. I ensured they were provided for, protected." "Protected from what?" Nikki demanded. "From you?" "From the truth." Victor's jaw tightened. "From the complications of my life." Diane let out a soft laugh. "You mean from the consequences of your actions?" Nikki ignored her this time, her focus locked entirely on Victor. "Does this person know who you are now?" A beat. "Yes." That single word landed like another blow. Nikki's eyes filled with tears, but she refused to let them fall. "And when were you planning to tell me? Or were you just going to let me keep playing the fool while your secret child walks around Genoa City?" Victor didn't answer. "Unbelievable," Nikki whispered. Diane stepped forward slightly, her voice almost silky. "He wasn't going to tell you. Not unless he had no other choice." Victor turned on her. "You've done enough." "Oh, I disagree," Diane replied coolly. "I think Nikki deserves the full picture." Nikki's voice dropped to a dangerous calm. "Where are they?" Victor's gaze hardened. "That's not something I'm willing to discuss right now." Nikki stared at him, stunned. "You're still trying to control this? After everything?" "It's not about control," Victor insisted. "It's about protecting." "Stop saying that," Nikki exploded. "You don't get to hide behind that word anymore. Not tonight." Billy finally spoke up, unable to stay silent. "Look, this is clearly bigger than any of us realized. Maybe we should all just take a step back." "Billy, not now," Nikki said sharply. He raised his hands in surrender, but didn't leave. Nikki turned back to Victor, her expression resolute. "You have two choices. You tell me everything right now, or I walk out that door and I never look back." The ultimatum hung in the air, heavy and irreversible. For a moment, Victor said nothing. And in that moment, Nikki's heart began to break all over again, because she knew him well enough to recognize what that silence meant. "You'd really let me walk away," she said softly, disbelief creeping in. Victor's voice, when he finally spoke, was quieter than before. I'm trying to handle this in a way that doesn't cause more damage. Nikki shook her head slowly. It's too late for that. Diane watched them, her expression unreadable now. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was something deeper, something raw and irreversible. Fine, Nikki said, her voice steadier now, though her eyes still burned with emotion. If you won't tell me, I'll find out myself. Victor's gaze sharpened. Nikki. No, she cut him off. You've kept me in the dark for years. That ends tonight. She turned, heading toward the door. Victor moved quickly, stepping in front of her. You don't understand what you're about to unleash. Nikki met his gaze without flinching. Neither do you. For a long moment, they stood there, locked in a silent battle of wills, one that had defined their entire relationship. But this time, something was different. This time, Nikki wasn't backing down. Finally, Victor stepped aside. Nikki walked past him without another word. The sound of the door closing echoed through the room like the final note of a symphony, one that signaled not an ending, but the beginning of something far more dangerous. Billy exhaled slowly. Well, that went about as bad as it possibly could. Victor didn't respond. He stood motionless, staring at the spot where Nikki had been just moments ago. Diane tilted her head, studying him. You underestimated her. Victor's voice was cold again, the steel returning. You've made a very serious mistake, Diane. She didn't flinch. No, Victor. I exposed one. A tense silence followed. Do you even understand what happens next? Victor asked. Diane's expression didn't waver. Oh, I think I do. Nikki will start digging. And when she does, she smiled faintly. Everything comes out. Victor's eyes darkened. If that happens, it won't just affect me. I know, Diane said. That's what makes it so interesting. Billy frowned. You're enjoying this way too much. Diane glanced at him. I'm ensuring the truth isn't buried. There's a difference. Victor stepped closer to her, his presence once again commanding, dangerous. You've set something in motion that you won't be able to control. Diane held his gaze. Maybe it's time you learned what that feels like. For the first time in a long time, Victor had no immediate response. Because deep down, he knew she was right. And somewhere out there, in Genoa City, the secret he had buried for decades was no longer safe. It was only a matter of time before the truth, and the person at the center of it, stepped fully into the light. And when they did, everything would change. The cold night air hit Nikki the moment she stepped outside the Newman ranch, but it did nothing to steady the storm raging inside her. The distant hum of Genoa City felt surreal, as though the entire world was continuing on as usual while hers had just cracked wide open. She wrapped her arms around herself, not from the chill, but from the overwhelming sense that everything she believed in, everything she trusted, had been built on yet another carefully buried lie. Behind her, the grand doors opened again. Nikki. She didn't have to turn to know it was him. Don't, she said sharply, her voice cutting through the night. Don't come out here and try to fix this with a few carefully chosen words, Victor. You can't fix this. Victor stepped closer anyway, his presence as commanding as ever, though there was something quieter beneath it now, something almost uncertain. You're not thinking clearly. Nikki let out a bitter laugh and turned to face him, her eyes blazing. Oh, I've never been more clear in my life. You lied to me. For years. Decades, even. I protected you, Victor insisted. No, Nikki shot back. You protected yourself. The words landed hard, and for once, Victor didn't immediately counter them. You made a choice, Nikki continued, her voice trembling but unwavering. You decided I didn't deserve to know. That I couldn't handle the truth. That your secret child, your flesh and blood, was somehow less important than your image. Victor's jaw tightened. That's not how it was. Then explain it to me, Nikki demanded. Because from where I'm standing, it looks exactly like that. Victor exhaled slowly, glancing away for a brief moment before meeting her gaze again. If I had told you back then, it would have destroyed everything we were building. Our family. Our future. Nikki shook her head, tears finally spilling over despite her resistance. And what do you think this does, Victor? What do you think this does now? He didn't answer. Do you love this child? She asked suddenly. The question caught him off guard. Because if you do, Nikki continued, her voice softer now but no less intense, then they deserved a father. And if you don't, her voice broke. Then what does that say about you? Victor's silence stretched too long. That's what I thought, Nikki whispered. Back inside the ranch, the atmosphere had shifted into something thick and uneasy. Billy paced near the bar, running a hand through his hair as he tried to process everything. This is insane, he muttered. Even for this family. Diane stood near the fireplace.